Check 1 2. I 1 2. Check 1 2. Sound check 1 2. I 1 2. One two, check 1 2. Check 2, check 2.
Tell him to mute this one. Mute this one. Tell him to mute this one.
Check 2. Check 2, check 2. Mild.
One, two, check 2.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Mild this one. Mild this one.
Good
Mild.
morning,
Check 2.
Your Excellencies,
Check 2.
distinguished guests. Welcome to day
Check
2
2.
of the International Cable Resilience Summit. If we could please take our seats as we're about to start with panel 3. I'd like to specially acknowledge the presence of Professor Sandra Maximiano, the chair of ANACOM Portugal. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. And to all our special guests, our dignitaries, delegates, and participants from all across the world, thank you for joining us today. And to our summit sponsors, we appreciate you, particularly the National Communications Commission, NCC, for hosting the gala night yesterday. So the summit yesterday highlighted on issues on the current state of submarine cable resilience, disruption rate, response time, and repair. Today we'll be taking the conversation further by starting with submarine cable technology and maintenance. Our moderator for panel 3 is Andy Palmer-Felgate. Andy, I'd like to invite you to please take your seat while I read your citation. Andy Palmer-Felgate is responsible for marine engineering and route planning of submarine cable systems at Meta and serves as the acting president of the North American Submarine Cable Association and he's also a director and executive committee member of the International Submarine Cable Protection Committee. Let's warmly welcome Andy as he takes his seat and he proceeds with panel 3. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to invite our panelists to come up to the stage, please, and I'll introduce them in turn. Okay, could all the panelists come and sit on the stage, and then once seated, I'll do the introductions. Thank you. Okay, so first up, Professor Sandra Maximiano, Chairwoman. No. Okay, is that working? Yeah, good. All right, take 2. Professor Sandra Maximiano, Chairwoman of ANACOM's Board of Directors since 15th of December 2023. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Amsterdam. She is an Associate Professor of Economics at ISEG School.
Check, check.
How's this? Good? Yeah. All right. She is coordinator of XLab, Behavioral Research Lab, and of the Master's degree in Economic Program. She is also a visiting associate professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Coimbra. Next, I have Dr. Eduardo Mateo. He is a director at NEC and head of technology and strategy and network architecture at the Submarine Network Division in Tokyo. Currently, he serves in the scientific committee chair of the Suboptic 2025 conference, and he is an executive committee member of the Suboptic organization. Mr. Sigurd Zhang is an EVP of HMN Tech, which was originally Huawei Marine. After a postgraduate from Harbin Institute Technology, he joined Huawei Optical Product Line and startup Huawei Marine in the year of 2008. Sigurd engaged in the optical communication industry for more than 25 years and led the R&D of submarine transmission systems and smart cities. Lastly, Dr. Elhad Qasim Said Ahmed. He has a PhD in physics and applications. He is the head of submarine cable infrastructure at Comores Cable. He's been working in the field of submarine cables for more than 8 years, and he is also the national focal point for the protection and resilience of submarine cables of the IOC, that's the Indian Ocean Commission, and East African states. So welcome again to all our panelists. Please give them a quick round of applause. So the topic of this panel is innovation in submarine technology and fault reduction. And our industry has a long history here. If we go back to the year 1850, when the first cable was laid between the UK and France, it only worked for a few days before being damaged by a fishing vessel. So we've been learning the hard way for about 175 years, both at protecting our cables better and also improving the levels of capacity. And we're now seeing that our cables are able to become smarter and more aware of their environment. So we're going to explore some of these subjects. My first question is for Dr. Eduardo Mateo. What technologies are on the horizon for next generation petabit level capacities? And what are the implications in resilience, reliability, repair complexity, and robustness against cable faults?
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Andy, for the introduction. So let's talk a bit about technology. Nobody panic. Stay, please. I would like to start with some important facts. I mean, as Andy just mentioned, the first transatlantic system, optical system that the industry built had a capacity of 280 megabit per second. Today, as we speak, actually, my colleagues are testing a transatlantic system that carries 500 terabit per second. That's half petabit capacity. That's 6 orders of magnitude improvement in 30 years. Now, for some people that may not look a lot, but to put this in perspective, I did some math yesterday, jet lag, you know, and if we had 6 orders of magnitude improvement in fuel efficiency, okay, from 30 years, a car today should be able to drive on a single tank all the way to Jupiter. That's the meaning of 6 orders of magnitude. So I think as a community, we should be very proud of what we have accomplished, because these 6 orders of magnitude are the foundation of the information society that we have today. So Andy asked about what is in the horizon. Well, we have done a tremendous job, and right now, as of today, we have been able to squeeze the maximum capacity that we can get over a single piece of bandwidth and on a single amount of noise. So that's the so-called channel limit. We are facing kind of fundamental limits. So to solve that problem, the industry has gone parallel. What we have done is to add more fibers, to add more repeaters. And in that scenario, we are now facing the same issues as the energy industry and other type of industry. Improvements now will be marginal. It's very difficult to increase capacity on a power efficient way. So we have now capacities that can reach the petabit level. We think 1 petabit capacity, 2 petabit capacity will probably make sense with second generation SDM technologies in some routes. But the industry also will need to identify what is the right size for a submarine cable. Does it make sense to continue to grow capacity? Can we make cable bigger? Does it make sense to make them bigger? What are the implications on that to resilience? We can see what happened in other industry. We can make very big airplanes, but for some reason, the industry decided there is a right amount, there's a right size for airplanes. I think the same thing will happen to submarine cables. So beyond a certain capacity, repair complexity could be a major problem. Can we splice hundreds of fibers in the middle of the ocean, especially if the weather is not so friendly? Can we use exotic fibers, hollow core fibers? Maybe they bring some benefit, but how easy is to repair them? What happens with water ingress? There is air inside a hollow core fiber. These are important things. Now, another aspect about size of cables. Can we give up the so-called single end feeding situation? Meaning that to increase capacity, can we deal with a shunt fault and traffic interruption? Probably not. So these are important things to consider when we think about technologies to grow capacity. So in summary, I think there is no disruptive technology in the horizon. Improvements will be marginal in terms of capacity per dollar, per unit of watt, and the industry will find an optimal cable size. But capacity will grow demand is there. We have an artificial intelligence revolution around the corner. We will need more cables. We will need more cables. And despite our best efforts in this advisory body, as long as we all like to eat wild fish, there will be cuts. We will do our best to reduce them, but as long as we like tuna sashimi, there will be cuts. So we need to be ready. We need to be ready to deploy more cables. We need to be ready to repair them. So I think my main message to public and private sectors is we need a new fleet. We need more vessels, vessels that are efficient, to lay more cables and to repair them. We have an AI revolution around the corner. AI models will be trained heavily in places where the energy is cheap, and these models will need to be pushed to inference locations all around the world, okay? So now, submarine systems are essential for getting people connected, but tomorrow they will be essential for any industry to be competitive. So that's what I see in the horizon, Andy.
Thank you, Eduardo. That was fascinating. And you touched on it, how the AI revolution is really driving a lot of this demand for capacity. But let's think about AI for a moment. What could AI, machine learning, and real-time analytics do for submarine cable resilience? And what might those technologies have wider impacts on within our industry? I'd like to pose that question to Mr. Sigurd Zhang, please.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be here, and happy to talk the hottest topic about AI, how AI driving submarine better and resilience. Just one small knowledge before, that most popularly fully open DeepSeek Chinese software actually is not well recognized or appraisal in any Chinese. The first two important CEO appraisal for DeepSeek is Tim Cook from Apple and Pichai from Google. So then globally, we all know that this is very good. We call fully open AI or profit AI, make everyone or every country can easily deploy the AI capability to improve the unity or personal efficiency and capability. But we know that AI has the limitations. AI cannot build a ship, and AI cannot build the cables for us, but AI can indeed improving all the soft works, which means that improving efficiency about planning, data analysis, or cable sizing, something like that. I think that we have made some very briefly in research for that. I think that the DAS technology, which is very promising, I think in 1 or 2 years we will be using for the cable damage findings and repairing, improving the efficiency will be the main important using about AI to do that. The other one is possibly, we think that the route planning for submarine cables, typically right now we have lots of data base and we need to make communication and also need communication with different government countries. But if that is AI technology or has been using in the industry for that, I believe that we will improving the efficiency about who submarine industries. But for the resilience, I think that it will be important for AI to use in the soft technology. For hard technology, I think that AI can do limit, or we need better AI in the future. That's my comments, Andy.
Thank you very much. So as we all know, our governments play a pivotal role in all of this. So I'd like to come on to Sandra next to ask, what does collaboration between governments, academia, and industry look like to promote innovation?
Can you hear? Yes, I think, is it working, yeah? Okay, so first of all, it's extremely important. We have been talking about collaboration all the time here, collaboration, coordination, information, and knowledge sharing. So it's extremely important and to have a multi-stakeholder forums like these. And when we talk about collaboration between governments, academia, industry in submarine networks, we are addressing multiple aspects. So in this sense, we can highlight, for instance, collaboration for developing a legal and regulatory framework that enhances resilience, so an important aspect, defining measures to mitigate risks and strengthen security, and sharing information which enables a swift and effective response to security incidents that may arrive. And I must say that the working groups that we form
كما
touch on
قد
this
تم
aspect.
تكوين مجموعة الأعمال
We
بخصوص
need to
ذلك
be aware
ونحتاج إلى أن نعرف أن بعض
as
أن
each
القيادة ليس سهلا أن التعاون ليس سهلا
governmental
للقيادة.
agencies, they want to maximize social surplus, and my apologies if I'm now talking as an economist. Right? Private companies, naturally and well done, they want to maximize profits, and academics want to publish scientific articles. So usually very often it's very difficult to align different incentives. So we need to find a collaboration that is a win-win. So that align incentives and makes the collaboration, as I said, a win-win situation. And I think resilience security is a good point and aspect that can actually make all of us align incentives. So governments, with the technical support of regulators, they play a key role setting the rules and policies that govern infrastructure deployment and investment, including the streamlining permits and ensuring international connectivity. They also play a very critical role recognizing submarine cables as critical infrastructure, and that's still not yet done in all countries equally, so there is a very important role here for governments. Regulators, of course, they play a very important role, and I can give an example, like through Sandbox to test innovative solutions, including those related to connectivity, and AI is also here a good example of that. And academia contributes through research and innovation, and of course nowadays top universities also offer top PhD programs on submarine related to submarine cables. So this is, and connectivity in general. So it's really really important. In the industry, in turn, with proper incentives, ensure that networks are built, maintained, and continuously improved. So I think research also should be encouraged that through partnerships, of course, with industry, regulators, government, and so that's extremely important. So we see some innovation and technology developments that were brought by academics. So AI is also a good example of it, and with benefits for the industry. So I think, as I said, we really need to fostering an ecosystem that balances connectivity, security, and innovation. So all these three aspects, they need the work of everyone, and we need to facilitate discussions among key stakeholders to ensure the establishing of global standards, particularly, this is another example, ITU standardization sector that also calls for the collaboration of everyone. And let me just say, like at a national level, like in Portugal, we are very aware of this, of importance of this collaboration. We also play an important role in European organizations and BEREC, and bringing also these issues of submarine cable resilience to BEREC, to the group of European regulators and ITU, and of course the advisory bodies, and our commitment to the advisory body is an example of that. So we are trying as regulators just not to stay in our own shelf, and of course fostering this collaboration. But I must say that this is an example that multi-stakeholder collaboration worldwide is possible, but there is a lot to do inside, in our own countries, because it's very difficult sometimes to bring everyone to talk, and different organizations, as I said, with different incentives to work in coordination and cooperation. So I think it's extremely, extremely important that we all do that when we go back to our own countries.
Thank you, Sandra. That was very insightful. Our next question is for Dr. Elhad Kassim. I'm going to ask the question in English, but he's going to reply in French. So if you can have your headsets at the ready, please. The question is about natural hazards. In some parts of the world, these are the primary cause of cable damage. Elsewhere, less frequent, but they can have catastrophic effects, as we discussed yesterday. So I'd like Dr. Elhad Kassim just to explain some of the academic research which is going on around this subject and how it can help us to better understand and predict the frequency of these type of underwater events, please.
Ok, merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. Je vais faire mon intervention en français pour que je sois à l'aise. Effectivement, il existe plusieurs domaines de recherche universitaire qui soutiennent aujourd'hui la résilience des câbles sous-marins face aux catastrophes naturelles. Mais il faut tout d'abord noter qu'avant les installations ou la pose des câbles sous-marins, le constructeur ou le fournisseur des câbles sous-marins mène des études préliminaires, ce sont des études scientifiques, suivies des surveilles marines, c'est-à-dire le constructeur des câbles sous-marins fait déplacer des bateaux scientifiques de surveille afin de connaître les informations ou de tirer des informations scientifiques dans les domaines où on compte poser les câbles sous-marins. Parmi les études qui sont menées par les bateaux de surveille ou les bateaux marines, il y a les études géologiques qui permettent de connaître le courant marin, tectonique, sismique et volcanique de la région où le câble devait être posé. Ils mènent aussi des études climatographiques. Ils mènent aussi des études océanographiques pour définir la puissance des vents, la puissance des vagues et des températures des fonds marins, parce qu'il y a certaines zones où les fonds marins ont des températures très élevées. Ils mènent aussi des études biologiques et environnementales. Cela permet d'identifier les zones protégées et les aires marines. Toutes ces études-là, toutes ces informations réunies, vont permettre effectivement d'identifier ou de connaître exactement la route que les câbles devaient être posés. Ces informations-là, on l'appelle en général RPL, c'est la route. Donc, toutes ces informations-là constituent une information qui va permettre de poser en toute sécurité les câbles sous-marins et éviter d'exposer les câbles dans les zones de catastrophes naturelles. Parce que pour identifier les zones de catastrophes naturelles, il est effectivement demandé de mener des études approfondies pour connaître exactement les lieux où il faut passer les câbles sous-marins. Toutefois, il existe d'autres domaines clés de recherche dans les universités pour soutenir la résilience des câbles sous-marins et faire face à ces nombreuses catastrophes naturelles, telles que la géophysique marine et sismologie. Cela permet de mettre des recherches, des prévisibilités et des tremblements de terre et des tsunamis. Il y a aussi la surveillance par capteur. Maintenant, on met des capteurs sur les câbles sous-marins afin de surveiller ces câbles. Maintenant, ce sont des recherches menées dans différentes universités. Il y a la partie dynamique des fonds marins qui étudie les glissements sous-marins et d'autres phénomènes géologiques dans les fonds marins. Il faut aussi identifier, parce qu'il y a certaines aussi universités qui mènent des études sur la modélisation et la cartographie des risques. Cela permet aussi de connaître certaines zones à risque pour ne pas poser des câbles et les faire face avec les changements climatiques. Il y a aussi l'ingénierie des câbles sous-marins. C'est très important parce que là, cela permet aux constructeurs de connaître les zones à risque, surtout dans les zones côtières où il y a certaines certains bateaux en activité ou bien des coraux. Certaines îles volcaniques ont des coraux. Donc du coup, ces études-là permettent aux ingénieurs qui construisent les câbles de savoir quel type de câbles ils vont utiliser. Est-ce qu'il faut utiliser des câbles à double armure, à single armure, dans certaines zones à risque. Il y a aussi certains programmes de collecte des données, tels que les câbles SMART. Ce sont des câbles qu'on intègre des capteurs afin de connaître certaines activités sismiques des régions. Toutes ces études-là permettent aujourd'hui d'éviter certains problèmes ou certains défis liés aux catastrophes naturelles. Voilà ma contribution par rapport à ça. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And that reminded me, as you were speaking, of the fact that we know far more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deep ocean. So it's a fascinating problem to deal with. And of course, we need more data, we need more information, and that's not always easy to collect underwater. So my next question is for Sandra. How can the integration of sensing facilities contribute to subsea infrastructure resilience?
So let me first answer in a more broad way about like technology and how technology can actually contribute to infrastructure resilience. And there was when I was listening like about eating tuna and how much we like eating tuna. Of course, we want to improve the strength of these cables and how become them, you know, like fish proved damage or something like that. But then we may get into a trouble that we may damage the teeth of the fish and then some other issues will come. So there is always like this advantage and disadvantage of technology that we have to deal with. And when we are talking about sensing facilities, and we're also mentioning here the smart cables, there's no doubt that sensor-based monitoring makes it easier to detect issues before they escalate, reducing downtime. This is for repairing and acting in that sense. So it's important also to act as a warning system, alerting authorities to potential threats like natural disasters. So that is important. But of course, and like AI, there are also other problems that we have to take into account, and so we have to properly treat the data, and that's some challenges that we face with this sensor-based monitoring. So, but that doesn't mean that we fear technology, because technology is here to help us. As you mentioned, it can help in this case to build a resilience. Let me tell you just about our flagship submarine cable project connecting Açores, Madeira, and mainland Portugal. This cable is called a CAM-ring and will span a total length of 4,000 kilometers. It's estimated to be in service 2026 or 2027 maximum. It's going to replace an old cable that is in operation since 1999, and this CAM-ring is going to be essential for ensuring territorial continuity and cohesion, including digital integration by, of course, increasing capacity and redundancy of the network, aiming to reduce interconnection prices, but also having some sensing capacities to warn about some potential occurrence of natural disasters. They leverage the power and the communication systems within the cables to collect data on critical deep ocean variables such as temperature, characterize the changed climate with improved estimates of ocean heat content and sea level rise as relates to water's thermal expansion. Ocean bottom pressure measures ocean circulation insofar as water flows from areas of high to low pressure. Track sea level rise related to melting land ice and improved tsunami early warning via direct real-time measurement of sea surface elevation, and seismic acceleration monitors seabed seismic activity to improve early warning for earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes. And this is extremely important for Portugal and especially in a source area, which is always like with a sort of orange red flag for earthquakes, and we have been having some lately occurring. So these systems became kind of helpful in building resilience related to that. We believe also this solution can contribute to several sustainable development goals, including those related to infrastructure and of course climate action. But as I said, as we know with AI, we have to be able to work together, work also through standardization, and make sure these technologies work for the best. And I think we have big challenges out there, and multi-stakeholder discussion groups again will be needed as well for improving these technologies and how we make use and the good use of these technologies.
Thank you. My next question is on small island states. It's for Mr. Elhad Kasim, so please put your headsets on once again. So small island states, they have unique problems, unique challenges. We saw the example with Tonga quite recently. Elhad is from the Comores Islands, which also has a unique set of challenges. And I'd like him to explain how these are being addressed. Is it simply a case of building more cables with more landings to provide more redundancy and resilience? Or is there more or different ways that this challenge can be tackled?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Modérateur. C'est une question importante liée aux petits États insulaires comme les nôtres, les îles Comores, qui n'étaient pas fortement des câbles sous-marins pour être connectés. Pour rappel, les îles Comores, ce sont 4 îles d'origine volcanique situées dans l'océan Indien, à l'entrée du canal Mozambique, entre l'île de Madagascar et la Tanzanie. Ces îles-là sont connectées, leur Internet dépend fortement des câbles sous-marins. Donc aujourd'hui, nous avons 2 câbles internationaux, les câbles Easy to Africa, et ainsi d'autres câbles domestiques qui relient les 4 îles des îles Comores vers les îles de l'océan Indien. Toutefois, il y a certaines îles qui se trouvent aujourd'hui connectées à un câble, qui sont des îles vraiment exposées au risque. Donc, pour faire face ou pour la résilience de ces des petites îles insulaires, pour faire face aux dommages liés aux câbles sous-marins, parce que vous savez, surtout nous, dans l'océan Indien, on fait face souvent à des tremblements de terre, on fait face souvent à des cyclones. Je ne sais pas si vous vous souvenez, récemment, là, il y a 2 mois, au mois de décembre, il y a eu un cyclone dévastatrice au niveau de l'île comorienne de Mayotte, qui a permis que l'île était isolée. À certains moments, il a fallu utiliser d'autres moyens de communication. Donc, du coup, la résilience ne devait pas effectivement se limiter uniquement pour l'installation des nouveaux câbles sous-marins, mais il faut effectivement multiplier la diversification des infrastructures. Si maintenant on installe des câbles sous-marins, il faut multiplier les différents points d'atterrissement. Il ne faut pas installer tous les câbles dans une seule île, mais si vous avez plusieurs îles, 3 ou 4 îles, il faut quand même à chaque île il y ait un point d'atterrissement vers l'international. Il faut aussi avoir des liaisons satellitaires. Vous savez, on ne peut pas parfois éviter certaines catastrophes naturelles. Maintenant, si tous les câbles sont coupés, les îles peuvent être isolées du monde. Donc, le mieux, c'est d'avoir un lien backup. Le lien backup, c'est vrai, c'est trop cher pour les satellites, mais au moins au départ, on peut avoir des liens backup satellitaires. Il ne faut pas aussi isoler l'augmentation des nombres de câbles qu'il faut installer. Il faut multiplier les installations des câbles, mettre en place aussi l'EXP, qui est un Internet Exchange Point. Cela permet également d'avoir un Internet local au cas où le câble est coupé, mais au moins on peut avoir l'Internet local entre les opérateurs directement. Donc parmi aussi les études de résilience, on peut effectivement noter la surveillance et la maintenance préventive. Il faut tout le temps mener de maintenance préventive. Vous savez, nous, les États volcaniques, en général, vers les côtes, nous avons beaucoup de roches, ce qui fait que souvent les câbles sont exposés. Donc il faut tout le temps mener des surveillances contrôler ces câbles-là. Est-ce que les câbles ne présentent pas ce qu'on appelle des champs fault? Si maintenant vous voyez qu'il y a des champs fault ou certains défauts, il faut les réparer avant que les câbles soient totalement coupés. Il faut effectivement mener aussi certaines maintenances préventives, qui sont très importants, de surveiller les câbles. Il faut également doter de certains bateaux des zones, des systèmes AIS, parce qu'il faut quand même recommander à tous les bateaux qui se trouvent au niveau des zones, activer leur système AIS qui va permettre effectivement de connaître là où les câbles sous-marins se connectent. Et enfin, il faut avoir une politique et des cadres réglementaires pour les États insulaires. Pour rappel, depuis 2022, les États des îles de l'océan Indien se dotent d'un document cadre qui permet effectivement de mener une politique de protection de la résilience des câbles des États de l'océan Indien. C'est un document qui permet de définir tous les câbles connectés aux îles de l'océan Indien. Il permet également de définir les différentes législations et sensibiliser toutes les parties prenantes des différents câbles qui sont connectés dans les îles. Avant de terminer mes propos, je voulais souligner que je voulais en fait vous montrer combien la technologie est importante pour les câbles sous-marins, parce qu'il y a 4-5 ans, au niveau d'une des 4 îles des îles Comores, l'île Mayotte, il ressentait des tremblements de terre à répétition. Il a fallu utiliser les câbles sous-marins en utilisant le système DAS pour poser des capteurs et définir et étudier les fonds marins. En étudiant les fonds marins, ils ont découvert effectivement qu'il y a un volcan, un volcan en activité qui s'est situé à 50 km. Cela montre combien il est très important d'avoir ces câbles-là et les exploiter d'une manière scientifique et autre pour définir et protéger nos îles qui font face aujourd'hui au changement climatique. Donc le smart cable que Madame a cité, c'est parmi les points très importants pour nos îles, qui va nous permettre non seulement d'avoir la connectivité, mais également surveiller nos fonds marins et faire face au changement climatique. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Now, next question is about another change in our oceans. You described climate change, but we're also seeing a huge amount of other uses of the seabed, in particular with offshore wind. We're seeing a lot of offshore wind farms coming to various shallow seas globally. So my question is for Mr. Zhang. What can we do to ensure that we're coexisting with these other new users of the seabed, and how do we ensure continued resilience?
It's a very tough question, Andy. And as we know that for shallow seabed, the application about fish farming and also that wind farm is very popular. I think it's the most popular technology or scenario for submarine cable industry we met in. And always with the human activities increasing in the shallow seabed, that will damage to the submarine cable and fiber cable systems will be increasing dramatically. And also that just we had discussed these sections and the 3 key technologies in innovation in the future for submarine. I think it's the optical technology for the capacity, which not is out with these questions. The second one is AI driving for industry running, and also that for new technology for the, improving the government communication and the transparency. I think that improving the transparency and communication effect between different industries, governments, and the different countries will be very important and very basic for the more and more activities in the shallow seabed activities across in different countries. And also that different countries belong to different interest unities. And I think that the first one is the more understanding about each other across the industries will be very necessary and important for the for this kind of conflict. And also some regulations dominated by the governments to make some preparations for this kind of conflict or damage will be very useful for every countries. Sometimes for the seabed crossing the different countries or different sea, I believe that we should more and more involvement and discussion between the countries by the international regulations, and support. That's my very briefly and quick answer to your tough questions, Andy.
Thank you very much. So we have time now for one more question from me, and then I'll open it up to the floor. My question is for Eduardo on policy measures. So what policy measures could help to drive innovation, and what could these innovation policy measures for resilience?
Okay, so policies is a difficult. Hello? I have sabotage here. No, I don't think it's the microphone. I think somebody is fixing something. Anyway, so technical innovations about resilience, aside for, is that an essential fix? All right. Aside for the, of course, the ICPC recommendations for route engineering and armoring distribution, which have been around for many years, there has been a lot of discussion lately on sensing technologies, particularly fiber sensing technologies, and what they can bring to the table in the context of cable resilience. So our industry has been very active in this matter. There are working groups in Suboptic, there are working groups in ICPC as well, trying to discuss these technologies and the potential on cable resilience, identifying risks, identifying threats. I have the privilege to be the chair of the scientific committee for this conference, our industry conference this year, Suboptic, and I have seen a remarkable amount of papers and submissions dealing with sensing, extremely innovative, from academia, from industry. We see also some action on some startups and companies providing solutions using the fibers of the telecom systems to potentially detect threats and deal with them. Let me use this opportunity to, of course, invite you all to attend Suboptic if you can. We have the privilege to have Professor Maximiano as one of the keynote speakers, so I think it will be a great conference in beautiful Lisbon, and sensing, fiber sensing in particular, will be a hot topic there. There are many flavors of fiber sensing. You have DAS, you have phase forwarding, state of polarization, hybrids. All of them has pros and cons. Some of them have limited reach, but very high sensitivity. You can pretty much detect everything, what's going on, including identifying the signature of propellers for different ships, so it's amazing what they can do. Some other techniques have unlimited reach. You can reach all the way in the submarine line, but limited sensitivity. Some of them require very expensive equipment, very stable, expensive lasers. Some of them require no equipment at all. And that's the one I would like to mention today. There are ways to extract environmental data from the submarine cable by looking at the transmission line cards, at the transponders, okay? This is courtesy of digital coherent science. So transmission technologies are very sophisticated now. We use every single item in light to encode information. And when we send light to a system that has thousands of kilometers, the environmental changes do many things to our signal, many things. We have to undo these things to recover the ones and zeros. Now that data is typically thrown away because it's only used for so-called equalization. But what we can do now is not throw that data away, just keep it, analyze it, and from that data understand environmental changes in the cable. And I think that technique could be a really game changer, because one of the issues of fiber sensing has been the cost of interrogators and the monetization of the applications. So in that sense, I think the ITUT, for example, can play an important role. Another thing, I also have the privilege to participate in the standardization of open cable metrics for submarine system. And I think now the ITUT can also play a role in identifying and defining the specifications of these transponders that, by the way, they are used for transmission, so there is no extra cost, and understanding how this data needs to be processed, and most importantly, to define that this data will be used for the particular purpose that needs to be used. And that will be a very important thing. So, of course, this is still in research. We have tremendous amount of data, but I think nobody can deny the potential of AI technologies to make sense of complex and big data. And very important, this will be a global solution. Every single landing station has tens of transceivers, multiple wavelengths, multiple fiber pairs. The amount of data will be tremendous. I am optimistic that we can make sense of this data and provide useful environmental data and perhaps improvements in cable resilience. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's been clear that the pace of innovation is getting faster and faster, and this is being really well supported by the long-standing partnership between and industry to help us achieve this. Are there any questions now from the floor? Yes, Simon.
Thank you. Fascinating panel, Andy. I just wanted to touch mainly on what has just been said by Mr. Mateo about DAS. Obviously, distributed acoustic survey, I mean, you've convinced me. It's a no-brainer that it will eventually help with resilience of cables. But I just wondered if the panel could say who is going to pay for that. Obviously, you've said that for some systems there's a high cost. Where's the money going to come from? Who is going to contribute to the development, and who is doing it now, to DAS systems and other systems of sensing?
Well, I think all of us can touch on that. We are a system supplier, and the beauty of DAS, of DAS, is that it works for any fiber. So we supply the fibers. We supply the fibers for telecommunications applications. Then it would be our customers, the cable owners, who will decide whether they want to invest in these interrogators that are put in the landing station to detect DAS. Now, DAS can reach only to the first repeater. You can do two things. You can just limit your sensing capabilities to the first repeater and see how much value is there on that, and to be able to, whether it makes sense or not, to invest. You can actually deploy a dedicated fiber only for DAS and maybe bypass the repeater and extend the reach. In terms of who is going to pay, I suppose it will be the cable owner if they find that these data can help them to maybe educate the industry or raise awareness with more data-driven decisions to prevent cables to happen, cuts to happen.
I can just add something to that. When we are talking about, and then more generally, and talking about financing, for instance, telecoms, there is one aspect that is extremely important. And again, sorry for my vision as an economist, but and the jargon that I may use. But the thing is, we have to be aware of the marginal social benefits that all these causes. And of course, as the social marginal benefits are higher and they have a bigger impact, cross-sectoral, then we need, of course, more intervention of like governmental intervention and through some sort of subsidization, okay? So that's because, of course, in terms of the individual, the marginal benefits that operators may have, they are smaller than the social marginal benefits, then we should have the intervention of other authorities, like governmental authorities. So that's one point. But I have no doubt that there are also enough individual marginal benefits for cable operators. That is, of course, now when we are talking about this digital ecosystem and bringing the big platforms into this discussion as well. So it will be, as I said, it will be a matter of seeing the big impact versus the marginal costs, individual marginal benefits, and social marginal benefits.
And I'd like to talk something to respond to these questions, shall we? And I think that the question is clear about the cost about this DAS technology. And we have thinking that originally the DAS technology is using for the first the segment between the cable landing station about a repeater. But right now our labs research seeming in the coming 1 or 2 years, promising that the DAS could be censoring the almost 1,000 kilometers from cable landing station, very promising with AI technology. The second one, the cost. I'm not sure that the quotations you received, that I think will definitely 1 million wrong or 1 to 2 million US dollar will be most possible for the DAS technology in the coming years to be deployed for the fiber sensing. The most benefit will be very quick identification about ship damage or anchoring, something like that. We will be very quick passing the AIS. I think that will be minutes levels. We can make alarming for the cable vendor, cable owners to get information that one cable was break or damaged by the anchorings or something like that. And also they have the AI technology can driving the DAS technology can make some warning about the cable itself. So I believe that this amount of investment will be very useful for the cable owners, not only for the users, and also not only for the science technology. Of course, we know that just this topic for this summit, the government is very important to need to be funding some very expensive and difficult technology in earlier, but with the booming about universal AI, I believe that, I'm not sure people knows that several millions US dollar, you can deploy full parameters of DeepSeek AI technology. You can use it, not very expensive. So I believe that the AI will driving from different cultures and different currents, different industries and different currency department. So the questions to you that today is difficult to answer, but I believe the coming year or this year, we will be promising that the cable owners can afford this cost to using the DAS and AIS technology to get payment for the cable who damage your cables. That's my thought.
Thank you. I think we've got time for just one more question. So I've seen a hand go up over there, please. I think you can use your microphone on your desk if you just press the button. Oh, maybe it's not working. Can we have a microphone taken over to speak?
Good morning, everyone. John Ode is the name, University of Science and Technology, Beijing. Please, I just want to ask these very, very important questions. The first thing is this. A build-up from yesterday's panel session, there was this repeated complaint of if there's any issue with cabling or there's any fault detected, that the process that the cable companies will go through to get permits, they have multiple permits to get before they fix any cables that's broken. Going forward, bringing technology into the cabling space, I want to ask, we have some academia here, some people in the academia environment. Is there any arrangement or is there any ongoing plan between, say, ITU and governments along the coastal areas in terms of raising funding? Because I heard something about funding. One of the good things that have happened to technology these days is the collaboration between the industry, the government, and the academia. So is there any arrangement for funding? Because it's going to be a win-win situation, that there's going to be a collaboration between the cable companies and the academic environment that will help speed up the discovery of new ways of handling these cable issues. So that's my question. Is there any arrangement of collaboration between the academia and, say, ITU and maybe governments and the cable companies to help speed up these cable issues? Thank you very much.
So, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there is any formal agreement or on that. But I would say that it's extremely important, and as I mentioned on my intervention before, when we go back home and actually try this collaboration to happen between governments, academia, industry, and regulators. And it's very important nowadays for regulators being present in multi-stakeholder forums and not to have this vision and the very traditional vision of regulators have to be a part or have to be on a site, and because, you know, like capture theory and or taking capture theory too far away, because nowadays we really need to talk. And if you want to make regulation agile, and as you mentioned, the streamlining process of licensing and the different licenses that we need, the timelines. So we need all to talk, and regulators, of course, need to be, they need to be very aware of advances in technology, because as you mentioned, there is, what is the point if you do all these advances in technology, but then we are still waiting for certain permits to act. So, of course, I think there's lots of work that we need to do within our own countries, because it all starts there. And so we have to be, as I can speak as a regulator, we have to be more open to come and participate in stakeholders forums, talk with operators, and understand the importance of a regulation that is predictable, that is agile, and that can somehow that can, of course, promote innovation, but takes into account security as well. So that's what we should all do. And that's why I'm here. That's also because I believe that what we should do. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Sadly, we're out of time, so please just put your hands together for our excellent speakers.
If we can give the moderator and the panelists a chance to take
شكرا
the picture.
للمحاور.
Thank you for such an interesting discussion on cable technology and
شيء ممتع نقاشات ممتعة.
Palmer-Felgate, our moderator, Professor Sandra Maximiano,
المحاور
Mr. Zhang, Dr. Eduardo Mateo,
شكرا لدكتور
and
ماتيو
Dr. Elhad Ahmed.
دكتور
Thank you so
العماد
much.
كلكم جميعا شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you. Let's appreciate them again as they take their seats. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a 20-minute coffee break, courtesy of WIOC, the West Indian Ocean Cable Company. So 20 minutes, please, for coffee before we proceed with panel 4. Thank you so much.
1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check.
Check. Yeah. 1, 2. Yay. Check, check, check. Check. Check, 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 check. Check. Yeah.
Distinguished guests, delegates, and participants, the coffee break is over. If we could please take our seats and start panel 4. For those of us outside, if we could please come back in to the hall and take our seats so that we can start panel session 4. Thank you. Once again, I'd like to appreciate the West Indian Cable Company, WEOC, for the coffee break. We'll be proceeding with panel 4, which will be focusing on legal and regulatory frameworks for cable protection. Our moderator for this session is Dr. Robert Pepper. Dr. Pepper, if you're in the hall, please take your seat. Thank you, sir. A round of applause for Dr. Pepper as he takes his seat. Dr. Robert Pepper is an inaugural senior fellow at the Global Digital Inclusion Partnership, GDIP, where he focuses on digital infrastructure, connectivity, and internet policy based on his extensive 4-decade career in government and the private sector. Welcome, Dr. Pepper. I'll be handing over to you to handle panel 4.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to our wonderful hosts. This has been a great meeting, a great 2 days, and the hospitality, the warmth of our hosts has been absolutely terrific. We've been talking about, let me bring up the panelists first. So why doesn't everybody on the panel come up, and then I'll introduce you. So there's no particular order on the seating because we're going to be out of order. Okay. Douglas is going to not here yet. Here he comes. Great. Thank you. So, Ambassador Ernst Noorman, a long career with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands, as well as within other ministries. Before taking up his new position as Ambassador at Large for Cyber Affairs, about a year and a half ago, he served for about 13 years as Ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Next is Dr. Anna Bouchard, who heads the UK security policy for subsea telecommunications cables in the Telecom Security and Resilience team at the Department for Science, Innovation, and Technology. And she has over 20 years experience in national security and foreign policy. Dr. Jane Munga is a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Jane leads the technology stream for the Africa program. Her research focuses on the continent's digital economy with insights on regulatory environment. She also is an expert in written papers on submarine communication systems. And Carnegie's going to be coming out with some papers on subsea, which maybe you can talk about, Jane. Douglas Ndrup is with our, thank you for coffee. He is a seasoned executive in digital infrastructure and submarine cable resilience. He serves as the Director of Regulatory and Strategic Affairs for WIOCC Group, Africa's premier hyperscale digital infrastructure investor, right? People who write checks are really important, right? So investors, right, without people writing checks, nothing gets built. And then at the bookend is Luke Slattery, who is Director in the telecommunications policy within the Office of the Pacific at Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where there's a key focus, and he focuses on digital development, subsea telecommunications cables, and a variety of other telecommunications matters relevant to the Indo-Pacific region. And Luke and I have collaborated on work with some of the small Pacific islands And some of those issues have already come up here over the last 2 days. So this is a session on legal and regulatory framework for cable protection questions. But in every session that we've had so far, there's been conversations about legal and regulatory framework. So this is our topic. It's the topic for everybody. But we're going to try to unpack some of these in particular and talk about some specific issues that sort of overlay a lot of the conversations that have happened over the last day and a half. So we're going to start with questions for Ernst and Douglas. And the first question really is addressing the fact that national governments have many tools and that really are based upon the ICPC best practices, things like separation distances for marine activities, marine spatial planning, penalties for cable damage, protection zones, timely charting of cables, improved coordination with the Coast Guard and port authorities. And again, those of us who are familiar with ICPC's best practices, these are not new, and we've heard conversations about these. So the question is, are governments looking at these tools holistically or only in part? And if they're not looking at them holistically, how might we encourage governments to look at them more holistically? So Ernst, why don't you start off, and then Douglas, you can follow up.
Thank you, Pepper. Thank you very much. And also take the opportunity to thank Nigeria for its wonderful hospitality, especially, of course, co-host Minister Tijani. And it's an honor to be here on stage on the second day. Now, the application of these tools, which you mentioned, varies due to differences in regulations, in enforcement and national priorities. Some countries integrate multiple protective measures, while others focus on isolated aspects, such as spatial separations, without strong enforcement or interagency coordination. Political structures, federal versus centralized, and economic interests may also influence protection levels, leading to inconsistencies. A more comprehensive approach is needed to enhance cable resilience and security. Until recently, we in the Netherlands faced the same issue. Measures and responsibilities regarding subsea cables were divided amongst many different organizations without clear oversight. That is why we set up our national program, Protection North Sea Infrastructure. This initiative is a comprehensive, interministerial effort that bundles together all relevant stakeholders, enabling us to implement a truly holistic, integrated approach to safeguard North Sea infrastructure. What we did was to set up a program along 5 different lines to weave together every available tool into a comprehensive strategy. Please allow me to explain those 5 different lines. First is a clear governance and unified coordination. At the core of our approach is a robust governance framework. We have established clear roles and responsibilities at all levels: political, operational, and tactical. The interministerial collaboration ensures that every stakeholder knows their part, from setting policy to executing day-to-day security measures. By doing so, we leave no room for ambiguity, and our collective efforts are both coherent and decisive. Second, enhance detection and continuous monitoring. Understanding the threat landscape is the first step toward effective protection. That's why we've placed a strong emphasis on improving our maritime situational awareness and maritime situational understanding. Through significant investments in sensor technologies such as AIS, radar, underwater sensors, and satellite-based systems, we are working towards establishing a 24/7 monitoring system for the North Sea. Our aim is to continuously detect, analyze, and respond to potential threats before they can impact our infrastructure. This protective approach is further supported by innovative pilot projects, or sandboxes, where we test and refine our imaging and data analysis capabilities in real-time scenarios. Third is increasing resilience. Our government believes that maritime security requires greater focus within our national security framework. We are committed to enhancing resilience by improving information exchange and taking proactive measures to prevent or mitigate risks at technical, operational, and strategic levels, even within the private sector. We actively share current threat assessments with all relevant parties so that both the sector and our North Sea partners can better protect themselves. Additionally, we aim to clarify the roles between public and private stakeholders to improve coordination and provide clear guidance for future developments. This approach empowers private entities with actionable perspectives to implement resilience-enhancing measures that are tailored to current threats and focused on mitigating risks during crisis situation. Fourth is to integrate the crisis management and preparedness. We understand that even the best preventive measures must be paired with a robust crisis response. To that end, we have developed a comprehensive crisis response playbook that integrates maritime security tasks into our national crisis management framework. This playbook outlines clear protocols, communication channels, and decision-making processes, ensuring that in the event of an incident, all relevant agencies, from the Coast Guard and intelligence services to our operational teams, are prepared to act swiftly and in unison. Through regular training and joint exercises, we continuously refine our capabilities to respond effectively to any crisis. And five and last, collaborative partnerships and international cooperation. The security of our subsea infrastructure is not solely a national issue. It has profound international implications. That's why our approach is built on the foundation of collaboration. We actively engage in public-private partnerships and work closely together with our North Sea neighbors and international allies. By fostering a culture of information sharing, joint analysis, and coordinated action, we not only strengthen our own defenses, but also contribute to the resilience of a wider maritime community. This collaborative spirit ensures that the best practices are shared, innovative solutions are developed, and collective security is enhanced. So in summary, our holistic approach, characterized by clear governance, state-of-the-art monitoring, integrated crisis management, and strong collaborative partnerships, demonstrates how we, in the Netherlands, are protecting our critical subsea cable networks. We believe that this model not only secures our own interests, but also offers valuable insights for other nations, aiming to enhance their maritime security frameworks. Thank you.
No, thank you. And actually, given the comprehensive nature of the holistic approach, I would expect that you're going to be feeding a lot of that into the work of the advisory body, which is really terrific. Douglas.
Oh, so
okay.
I'll try and put
You're
some
on.
context. So for an operator,
Hold the microphone closer.
We've been in the trench for over 15 years now, and our experience in the 14 African countries that we operate in has to be considered from a contextual basis. In 2013, the internet penetration in Africa was around 13%. And of course, over the last decade, the focus has been on universal access. So we put our heads together, and the focus primarily has been on creating more access, more open access, connect the homes. So it's not surprising that a lot of the attention has purely been on connection rather than the strategies that we can use to protect the existing infrastructure. But we've seen a significant growth from the benefits or from the gains that we've made from universal access, and it is actually the time to ask ourselves, what are we doing in terms of protection? It's an interesting question you raise because, yes, the ICPC has standards, the EU has a couple of other strategies they've put together, but why have we not adopted them as a continent? To answer that question, you'd need to look at it from, in my view, three main areas: protection, accountability, and collaboration. We've talked about collaboration across the room most of yesterday and today. But if you think about the concept of protection, you have to think on the investment side, how we motivating these strategies in terms of investor appetite. It's also driven by uptake of capacity, and the investment in some of those technologies that are needed by some of these governments have to align with the protection strategy that the cable owners themselves want to adopt. Without taking away from what my colleague has said, it is a high time that we ask ourselves that question, and I'm glad we have a forum to do that today. But to answer your question, it's not a simple yes or no on why these strategies are not being adopted. Each country has its unique challenges. We would know, we've been at it for a long time now. But there is an opportunity for us to, and I'm sure we'll discuss a lot of this across the room, to look at which ones are practical for us. I was speaking to a colleague from Main One now, and the view is that the philosophy needs to change. In our experience in the permitting side, the philosophy can either take two sides, and I think it was discussed sometime back in the ICPC, where government takes a step back and says, you need to come and demonstrate to us that your project, for instance, in the environmental permits, come and demonstrate to us that the project has no impact to the environment. The other strategy they could take is you bring your project and they assess for compliance. So it shifts the burden and gives an opportunity for government to take more accountability. But some of these have to take the natural process to get there.
Yeah, no, thank you, yeah. And that's, governments want the investment, but they need to actually have the types of protections and practices that attract the investment, right? So yeah, that's extremely helpful. Thank you. The next question is going to be for Anna, Jane, and Luke. In the field of legal measures to protect submarine cables, what do you believe are the most effective measures to be implemented by everybody? It's not just one country, but across the board. Anna, why don't we start with you, then Jane, and then Luke. Thank you.
Super. Thanks very much. So I think I'll start with repairs. So yesterday, there were quite a few sessions on repairs, and we talked about the importance. And I think the most illustrative thing that comes across from that is that the longest delay in repairing a cable is waiting for that permit. But there are other solutions, and I was very pleased to see the slide Kent's speech yesterday. So in the UK, we have a bit of a good news story on this. I think we have the same in the Netherlands. I will let you, and in some other places. But we have a good news story on this because we have an exemption built into our licenses to allow for emergency repairs. So as a result, we have, a very high fault count in the UK. We have quite a large continental shelf. We have a lot of fishing, busy shipping lanes. But we have one of the fastest repair times. And that's just because of that exemption. But cables are multi-jurisdictional, just like some of the problems that we see with UNCLOS when we cover with shipping. A cable has to pass through multiple exclusive economic zones, multiple territorial waters for a system. Take a system like To Africa, travels all over the world. And so, whereas we can have a good news solution in a story in the UK, that cable can still get damaged elsewhere and while we're waiting for a permit to come through, will lead to a reduction in our resilience while we wait for that cable to be repaired. And I think there's something really important that we need to think about as countries, is to understand what it actually means to think about this technology as our critical national infrastructure. So, Andy said yesterday, you wouldn't install a cable without a maintenance plan, without having in place the requirements that you need to fix that cable if it gets break to get it up and running. So why are we as governments not putting that in place when we're getting new cables in? We know the maintenance agreements are there. We know the ships are there. We know that industry are working on it. Why are we waiting until the breaks happen, until our countries are carrying a reduction in resilience, to then suddenly, oh, quick, we've got to do this process, you need to do this study, you need to do this, you need to pay these taxes, you need to get diplomatic clearance for this vessel to come in. All of these things, why don't we have that system built in? And I think there's a lot that we can do as an international community to really think about that, and a lot that we can do working with industry. In terms of new systems, again, this is something that we don't get right in the UK. I like to think we're not bad, but there's still a lot that we could do to improve. I think industry have been very clear with us there. They want transparency, and they want clear timescales, because you can't plan for a multi-billion-dollar cable that crosses the whole continent unless you know when you're able to get that planning in place, when you're able to have the ships do the different sections of the build. So I think having that transparency, and again, it comes down to this critical national infrastructure point. Are we using cables as a way of extracting finance from our territorial waters, from our exclusive economic zone, by charging them high rents, by charging them large amounts in terms of surveys and all the rest of it? Or do we recognise that this is critical national infrastructure that facilitates our economic development and our digital economies, and that we require in order to run all of our services? So again, it's that balance on transparency, timescale, but also reducing costs.
Thank you. Jane.
Sure. And good morning, and first my gratitude to fellow panelist, Dr. Pepper, and also to the Nigerian government. Really want to say thank you, and also to the co-hosts, the ITU and ICPC. So you ask a very relevant question, and I'm going to tackle it from the African perspective, because I focus on African research at the Carnegie Endowment. And a key research that we've been doing is trying to track the different digital economy policies that are in Africa, and in particular, we're also looking at the submarine ecosystem. And we've come up with some few findings, and it's some of what Dr. Anna said and everybody has been saying here. First, we found out that the policy regime on submarine cables, or some call it undersea, is a complicated affair. It's like that social media post when you ask, are you in a relationship? Yes, no, complicated. This is what we've just found. It's very complicated, and I'll say why it's complicated. For the multiple reasons, as we've said, there are multiple jurisdictions and in multiple levels. So you have the national government, and within the African context, we have 55 African countries that are recognized by the African Union. And then beyond that, we have, out of those 55, we have 39 African countries with a coastline. We have 38 countries that land cables on them, with the exception, of course, of Eritrea. So what does that mean? You have 38 very different legislations when it comes to submarine cables. And secondly, these legislations are not in one place. They move from different policy places, mostly in the ICT sector, but also in the marine department. But also, they are also in multiple documents. So first and foremost, at the very national level, it's not as simple as you'd want to get it. Secondly, then now you move to the subnational level. This is why it even gets more complicated, especially with landing of permits. They're subnational actors, and it gets murky. It's not visible. You don't know who, sometimes even who to go to, and who is regulating that coastline or that part of the waters, and the different kinds of jurisdictions and bureaucracies then come out of that. So you can see the level of multiplicity here is quite complex. And that's why, for me, I would answer that question specifically to say maybe we need to change the approach more than saying a legal measure, because we need a different kind of thinking towards this. And that thinking needs to bring us to a coordinated and harmonized level of how we look at submarine cables. We've talked about permits. First, we need a one-stop shop area. At the national level, we need a coordination mechanism between the different ports or the different departments. Previously, I was in the government of Kenya, so I understand how silos work within some of these ministries. But we definitely need better coordination. I was talking to Wale this morning about their experience in one of these countries. And they're saying you have to deal with some of the petro industry or in areas where you're working with different jurisdictions and understanding how they regulate that. So it's important then that we coordinate that secondly. And lastly, as I wind up, I think it's also important that when we're dealing with these issues, there's a need of raising awareness at the policy level on how these submarine cable permits and regulations affect the entire process. So shift in how we do this, and also in approach. Let's also build the capacity of those who are developing these regulations, fast track the process so you're not waiting for a ship to dock when it needs to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And actually, it's your point, which is great. It's not just effective measures to be implemented by countries, right? But also within countries, between the national and subnational or even very local levels, right? And that type of coordination becomes critical, right? So it's horizontal and vertical, if you will.
True, true.
Yeah, thank you. Luke. The mic needs to, terrific.
Hello?
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Pepper, and to my colleagues before me. As Pepper mentioned, I'm from Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs, and my ordinary role looks at the Indo-Pacific specifically. I feel very privileged to be here in Nigeria, which is a long way from the Indo-Pacific, but the problems that we deal with here are pretty consistent, so not unique to any of us. And for that reason, I think the answer to the question of one most effective measure is that there isn't one, because it's really complicated. There's anchors, there's undersea seismic activity. The cables exist in some of the most challenging environments that we know. There's a range of human-induced and natural threats to the cables, and so I think as a result you need a pretty diverse approach to protecting them. Australia's position is focused on protection, prevention and resilience, and so if you were starting from scratch and looking for a one-stop shop that does its best to address many of these challenges, I don't think you can go far past UNCLOS and some of the provisions there, and so ratifying that I think would be a good starting point. So for Australia in particular, there's an obligation to ensure Australian flag vessels and crews don't damage cables, and that's in our domestic system. Obligations to provide access to vessels to lay cables and repair them, and also obligations to protect the cables in territorial waters. So domestically within our Telecommunications Act, a lot of these provisions come into place in Schedule 3A of the Act, and that also establishes our regulator, the Australian Communications and Media Authority, which oversees a lot of these things. In particular, a framework for establishing protection zones, and also landing permits within Australia as two key parts of our domestic system. Separate to that is the security considerations, and so our Department of Home Affairs oversees a number of measures that are focused on sabotage, espionage and interference. and that includes both physical and cyber concerns. I think within our domestic system, a really joined up approach through those entities in the government that are interested in cables is really important and something that people should look to replicate, I think. Also key to our system is the infrastructure is fundamentally owned by industry usually, and so there's shared interests in protecting the infrastructure. So through our legislative framework, there's a requirement for carriers in Australia to protect their network, which is a good opportunity for government and industry to work together on the threats that we see to cables. There's also a requirement to notify the government of changes in the communication provider's network, which is another great opportunity for government to work with industry and very important to some of the threats and challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thank you. Luke, you mentioned UNCLOS. So let me, which is great, a great transition to Douglas. The UN Convention on Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, requires state parties to establish offenses under domestic law for damages to cables. Yet most state parties have not yet established that list of what are the offenses. Why do you think that's the case? And frankly, more importantly, what can be done about that to implement UNCLOS? Luke mentioned this, but you work here in Africa, 55 countries. So maybe you can give us a perspective on how UNCLOS is viewed here and what you think can be done to improve the use and enforcement of UNCLOS.
So I think it was Andy that put up some data on where most of the submarine cable cuts happen. They happen mostly in our own economic zones. So we do actually, it's something we do need to ask ourselves. On the one hand, the African economy benefits from internet penetration. Everything is moving online. A lot of the economies now are leaning on internet connectivity as the basis for economic growth. The last build of a submarine cable, well, as WIOC, we've put in just under $1 billion in terrestrial and subsea investment. So why are we not doing anything about it? Yet, again, the most number of cuts are happening within our special economic zones. It's a complex question because for a long time, the focus of most African governments have been, again, as I said, universal access. Let's focus on how much money we can raise to create more connections and create more access. But that has shifted the focus away from really, okay, over the last 10 years, we've been building this infrastructure. What are we doing to protect it? Some of the systems that, Africa is a large continent, and you would expect that because of the size, the number of submarine cables would be in excess of thousands. But there are countries in Africa today that have a shoreline that still don't have a submarine cable. And you would wonder how that is, right? Yet, as the internet today as we know it, 98% of the internet goes through cable. So what's happening to these countries? What's happening to countries that rely on, that are landlocked, that rely on countries with the shoreline? Why are we not having a regional conversation on how to create more protections for these cables? To answer that question, you'd need to look back into how we organize ourselves in terms of collaboration, the regional bodies and the efforts that go to protecting submarine cables. UNCLOS is a 1982 legislation. It's a high time that we shouldn't be truly just leaning on UNCLOS as the basis for protecting our own infrastructure. There has, give credit where it's due, there has been significant effort. The Nigerian government has led the charge by declaring submarine cables as critical infrastructure. There's a new wave of awareness that's also not just on the continent. I think the US is also trying to put together a Submarine Cable Protection Act that will mandate the US government to also come up with strategies to protect these cables, because we're relying more and more on them. And I think it's a high time that all partners that are in a lot of these opinion leaders to government start sparring this conversation. And there's the hope that because the ICPC has done a lot of work to provide certain starting points. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's already a starting point that the ICPC has started, the ITU, that we could use to improve the local laws in terms of protection. And then my second point is around accountability. The current approach to accountability from subsea licensing and permitting perspective is you come, you get your permit, it's a piece of paper that you go back with to allow you to start your lay. But there needs to be a bit more effort towards protection. I think it was a speaker yesterday who said their father is a fisherman and their priority is hardly to find out the best route to fish. It's to collect the fish, and at the end of the day, if they don't have the awareness of how important some of those submarine cables are, then we will find ourselves in the same situation we have been over time. There are obviously certain other considerations to be made, because of course there's some areas in Africa that are still under conflict. We've seen the situation with the Red Sea. For some of those, there's still a bit more effort to be done around what that translates to the submarine cable industry. But yes, I would take my key points around lack of legislation to awareness, and I think this summit is a great opportunity for government to also bring all the players together to collect the interests and understand how can we protect the interests both of the investors and the operators and the stakeholders in the seabed, the fishermen and the pipeline owners, because they are all core tenants of the seabed.
Thank you. Actually, you raise a really important question, or an issue, which is UNCLOS is over 40 years old, right? But there's been some new developments as well, which you've identified the importance of. And so, Jane, maybe you can talk about, last December, the UN General Assembly adopted a new resolution on oceans and law of the sea. It urges all states in cooperation with the International Maritime Organization, IMO, and other relevant international organizations and agencies, I would think the ITU as well, as part of the UN family, to improve the protection of seabed infrastructure such as submarine cables. Do you think the IMO and ITU are doing enough in this regard? What do you think would be a good approach going forward? And then how can we take some of that, right, as an agenda and build it into the advisory body going forward to come up with, outputs, recommendations to move the needle forward?
Thank you for that question. It's tricky to answer on whether ITU is doing enough when I'm sitting in an ITU meeting, but I think these international bodies, ITU and IMO, are doing a great job in starting the conversation. Yesterday I was challenged by something that was discussed from ICPC. He said that they started thinking about this idea 2 years ago on how to start having an advisory council on the resilience of submarine cables. I think that is what has been birthed here, but we still have a longer journey to go because I want to double click on what Douglas has said. Why are we not having this conversation regionally? From henceforth, as we take this, as we are challenged to have practical action, can we start having regional conferences around this? An African conference that brings all the stakeholders and talks about submarine cables. I had seen the Secretary General for the African Telecommunications Union. I don't want to call him out, but I think there's a challenge to the African Union and such bodies now to start tearing those conversations down, and also on the regional bodies. But also, I want to also say that within this framework of how we can continue this conversation, there's still, again, as I said in my earlier point, we need to start framing and thinking differently. And because of the diverse interests that are just within the submarine cable ecosystem, again, it's been said it's a private industry investment, but there are shared interests on this. So what does that mean? Even when the private sector is deploying this, there still needs to be some thinking that is brought in from all those who have those shared interests. And I think for Africa, it's time we start thinking as one around this. We've seen a lot of diverse thinking. We have 55 different regions, but I think the time to bring everybody to the table where we may not be as one, but can at least think as one on how we take this conversation forward and come up with action items that help us come up with one actionable solution. And secondly, when we talk about deploying and the resiliency of the ecosystem, it's going to be very, very critical that the expertise that is needed within developing this, we heard about the innovation around this sector, starts to flow down into the different various stakeholders within that room. Again, I want to double click on the policymakers because policymaking also determines the kind of permits and regulations that come out of it. And it's important that there's an understanding of the kind of how we can either stifle or build that ecosystem. So we want something that thrives vis-a-vis that which is going to stifle the ecosystem. So for me, it's to say that yes, we are seeing a lot of work that's happening at the ITU, at the very apex of these discussions. But I think the time has come now where we need to tear that down and come up with actionable solutions at the regional, national. What you've just said about Nigeria is great to see there such initiatives happening. We need more countries that will take up that call in Nigeria, in West Africa, in other regions, countries that will start championing for these conversations to ensure that we are double clicking on the right things and we are having the right conversations with the right partners on the table. Thank you.
Douglas, please.
Yeah, and I think we really can't overemphasize the permitting conversation. Singapore is a good example. The current crisis is congestion of submarine cables. Yet in Africa, there are countries that don't have even one. There's countries that give submarine landing permits that are $1 million a permit, right? And again, you have to go build the project, find the funding, and then still find that significant amount of money for a single permit. So, and it was an interesting conversation from the Singapore government that if they have a submarine cable project, it takes less than 2 or 3 weeks, was it, to approve all the permits? Yet, in our continent, you'd have to go through almost 15 or 16 other different agencies. In one of the permitting processes, we had to go through the Department of Rare Trees, the Department of Archaeology, the Department of Culture. It's a high time that we sort of centralized the permitting process, and it will make it easier to get more cables into Africa and spur investment. And this is something government can take on.
Thank you. Actually, that leads to a great question for Anna, which is, at the regional level, there have been some regional bodies that have recently called on its member states to consider measures to expedite permitting for both new systems and repairs. And the repairs, particularly important that it be fast, timely. How can such measures work? Can they be adopted globally? Are there some good practices as examples to address some of the questions that Douglas raised? And, you know, Douglas, your point, I think, is extremely important, which is looking at, you know, new cables and permits for new cables, right? It's counterproductive to think of that as a cash register to generate cash, because the economic benefits to a country of having the cable land and build it quickly, right? Those economic benefits financially overwhelm any short-term, you know, ticket price for a permit. And more countries are recognizing that. But the older approach was seeing it as a way to raise revenue, not to facilitate critical infrastructure investment. And so, Anna, some of the things that you're seeing on a regional basis to streamline permitting, I think, could be really important globally. So you might want to, if you could talk about that.
I think if we look at UNCLOS, it sets out, you know, the requirements that are needed for subsea cables, for, but also for maritime law. And then you look at the fact that not all countries have ratified it, and then you look at the fact that an awful lot of countries haven't put into place legal requirements that are there. And then you look at the different permitting structures across the globe and how everyone is different, everything is slightly differently structured. And how, what I was saying before about those permits not necessarily matching up to the importance of this infrastructure, and how we need to really change the way that we think about these things. It is a global network. It is the backbone of our digital economies. We need to work together, and we need to work with industry, and we need to think about the way that we think about this infrastructure. And, you know, when we start to change the way that we think about that, and we start to actually raise the importance of putting, you know, in place the requirements under UNCLOS, in place the requirements that we need that are, you know, streamlined permitting, that we work together, that we think about the holistic nature of a cable. So are we working with our close partners when we know that cables are probably going to have to transit their exclusive economic zone to get to ours? How are we going to think about this and think about that as part of kind of working together, I think is really important there.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, the different types of permits. So at the national level, you're looking at, or maybe regional within a country, permits on the landing, on the wet side. But in many countries, you also have local permitting by municipalities, which in the US is a big issue. So, you know, and last week we were at a session in London where our colleague from ASN said the permitting issues, both on the wet side and once you get to the CLS, right? He said, just to give you an idea of how more complicated and onerous it is, when he started working at ASN, they had one person working on permits. He said, they now have 17 people having to deal with permits, right? And that complexity leads to delay and uncertainty that affects, Douglas, investors, the people who write the checks. So, you know, how do we, within countries, right? So there's the coordination on the economic zones, on the coordination across countries. Has anybody thought about how do we bring that to the local level within a country? Because it's additional local permitting requirements at even a municipal level. Does anybody want to address that? Ernst?
Well, what we are trying to create now is a sea cable coalition, a Dutch sea cable coalition nationally, to indeed bring all parties together. I think we have an advantage as Netherlands because we've been fighting or working to protect our country against water. And that means, you cannot say, well, a local government, I have different interests. No, we're all threatened by possible flooding, and we had to create dikes, infrastructure. And I think that helps us also create a coalition in the Sea Cable Coalition to make a one-stop shop. And we're still working on it, but we think we achieve it, that it will be really possible for cable coalitions to apply for only one-stop shop for all the permits, instead of going around and then have to address the local requirements, etc. But I think we do have an advantage with our history of working together in all parts. But also, once we have achieved it, we hope to share at least this experience also in the advisory body for others to learn from.
Did anybody else want to address that? Or Douglas, please.
Yeah, so the philosophy needs to change. The philosophy needs to change. At the moment, the general feel is that an investor in a submarine cable needs to demonstrate to government why they should do the project and how important it is to the state, right? Therefore, you have to go do your own surveys, invest in getting all the data to demonstrate to government that it has met all the requirements. And that approach then means there's been no attention to enabling a centralized approach for instance, a developer or an investor in a cable to bring a cable in. And that's how, with the example of ESN, they have to invest in people to understand the regulatory system and permitting process, and then come up with all the requirements to go back, because the burden of proof is with the consortium members and the investors in the submarine cable, to demonstrate to government that the project should go ahead. Is it time we actually realize that because this is critical infrastructure, government should look at the project, and that's the centralized approach. You come to government, and government collates all the interested parties to give their feedback on any areas of non-compliance with the project. So it shifts back by shifting the burden to the government to do that, it allows for opportunity for cross-leveraging feedback. So that you don't have to move with, for instance, an approval document from one department to another, because then there's a common forum to test each of the collective interests.
Thank you. Yeah, Luke, why don't you go ahead, and then I was going to actually ask you and Ernst a final question, but yeah, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Just quickly, I don't know necessarily that we've got it completely right, because permitting is such an issue for the industry, I understand that, but to take an isolated example, we're in Australia applying to land a cable within a protection zone. It streamlines the process, and in many cases, applying to land a cable in the zone, the process can take half as long as it would to land a cable outside of the zone, because there's efficiencies there. So having that protection zone framework really does support the permitting process as well. Thank you.
That's a great example. So the last question maybe for both you and Ernst is, to improve the legal and regulatory frameworks that we've just been talking about, what are the effective measures that we need to incorporate in terms of knowledge and understanding of industry norms and practices, as well as policy requirements for critical infrastructure. At a very practical level, how can that happen, and how can that cooperation be achieved? And then this feeds into the work of the advisory body trying to have actionable recommendations. So Luke, why don't you kick off, and then Ernst, you can wrap us up.
Thanks for the question. I mean, as we've been discussing the last 2 days, but on this panel as well, the problems are really broad. And the only way that we can tackle them is to do it together, and that includes cross-government and also with industry. And so for us, we build that into our approach in as many places as we can, and including our regulatory approach. So an open dialogue with industry, open and ongoing dialogue with industry to really make sure that's built in. Domestically, we engage regularly in telecommunications advisory bodies. We establish them. Our legislative process requires that we consult with industry as part of assessing the regulatory impact and benefits, so that's built in there. And then internationally, the Australian government's a registered observer on ICPC, but also we actively engage in the advisory body and also PTC and Submarine networks world. So it really is essential. We recognise ICPC government best practice guidelines in our approach, and in particular our management and protection framework for submarine cables requires that industry specifically demonstrates how they propose a new cable is going to achieve ICPC best practice. So that's recognised in the approach as well. I talked about the efficiencies of landing cables in protection zones. We hear from industry that they like the approach of protection zones, they want more of them. So we're actively considering more protection zones in our system. And yeah, there's many benefits of that. The other thing I'll talk just briefly about is our Cable Connectivity and Resilience Centre, which has been established under our Quad Cables partnership. The Connectivity and Resilience Centre has three main functions: demand-driven technical assistance and training for people in the region that are looking for it. They commission reports and analysis to benefit submarine cable resilience in the region. And they also convene dialogues in the region for folk that are interested in these issues to come together. And I think that's important in recognising that all these cables have at least two ends, and there's no way for us to solve these problems without industry, academia and governments coming together. Thank you.
Thank you. Ernst, you started us off, and so you can wrap us up.
Thank you. Well, I leave the wrapping up to you. If I look to my country, we need to protect the infrastructure on the sea and in the North Sea. It's wind farms, electricity, data cables, gas pipes, sea lanes. It's very busy out there. It's a region bustling with numerous active stakeholders. So protecting both subsea telecom cables and energy and infrastructure is essential for maintaining our digital connectivity and energy supply. To improve our legal and regulatory frameworks, we must integrate the deep insights and practical know-how of the industry. This means moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach and embedding real-world practices into our policies. We achieve this by forging robust public-private partnerships, where both government and sector stakeholders work side by side. In practical terms, our approach is twofold. First, at the strategic level, we establish a framework for general collaboration. This involves sharing general information and aligning long-term security goals. By doing so, we create an environment where best practices flow freely between all parties. Second, we recognize that there's a need for intensive technical cooperation. In this realm, detailed and even real-time data sharing is crucial. Such a hands-on approach enables us to quickly address risks, coordinate repairs of sea cables, and ensure continuous operations of critical infrastructure. Our vision is to create a dynamic, flexible living system of agreements, a partnership that is periodically reviewed and refined to keep pace with technological advancements and emerging threats. It is through this evolving partnership that we can make sure that the infrastructure remains resilient, ensuring energy supply security, digital connectivity, and continued progress of our energy transition. As the North Sea grows in importance for both our energy supply and digital communication, it becomes even more essential that we build resilience across all levels. By combining government oversight with the expertise of our sector partners, we will safeguard our infrastructure against disruptions and create a safe foundation for the future. In conclusion, by embedding industry knowledge into our legal framework and fostering an adaptive collaborative partnership, we can secure the North Sea's critical assets effectively. Together, through strategic vision and technical cooperation, we will ensure the uninterrupted functioning of our vital infrastructure. Thank you.
No, thank you. So what's come out to me, right, not just on this panel, but through the entire 2 days, but particularly here, is the importance of close collaboration, coordination, and alignment between the private sector that's making the investments, the operators that are building the networks, the policymakers, the regulators who lay out and identify the goals for government, and recognizing that this is critical infrastructure and that there is the need to create the right incentives for the investment, but it has to be safe and secure as well, right? And that requires ongoing and continuous conversation, which is why the work of the partnership of ITU and ICPC on the advisory body, I think, is so important. And the short timeline to actually get something done, not just to make it a conversation, but actually come up with actionable recommendations for both industry and government. So thank you very much. And if you could all put your hands together and thank a terrific panel. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, we're over time, but we can ask it. Do we have time for any questions? Oh, okay. I thought we were. Is there? Andy, please. A microphone. Andy, do you just want to grab a mic? This one? Or?
Is that working? Is it working? Yeah.
Oh, it is working.
Oh, okay. So a quick question for Luke. If I understand correctly, with regard to the Australian cable protection zones, they're about 40 miles in length, so they cross both the territorial sea and the EEZ. In the territorial sea, they are enforceable with regard to anybody, whether overseas, foreign flag, vessel, or otherwise. But in the EEZ, they're only enforceable with regard to Australian nationals or Australian flagged vessels. Is that correct? And what policy changes would be needed to make your regulations enforceable with regard to foreign flag vessels in the EEZ?
Thank you. I believe that's the case, yes. I think the best approach is engagement in multilateral sort of forums and with partners. And one of the key things about the protection zone arrangements is it enables a documented pathway, I guess, where the cables exist. So it helps with sharing locations and specific areas where measures need to be increased to protect the cables. Thank you.
Any other questions? We do have time. There was one back. Well, oh, Namsa.
Thank you very much.
And then, yeah, we'll do Namsa, and then the gentleman in the back there. Why don't we do both questions back to back, and then we can have the responses. Please.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you for a very interesting panel. A lot that I've learned there. As I wear a technical hat, so excuse me if it sounds like an ignorant question. Why is there a need for permits if you've gone through the whole process of rationalizing the reason why you're building a cable, done all the studies, and you've received the initial permit to build the cable, and maybe just touching on Mr. Slatter's comment on protection zones, would that maybe facilitate a bit of a change in the whole aspect of permitting in terms of thinking about a one permit for build and maintenance, which means when your cable breaks, all you just need is a pass, probably, just to clear you to go and fix your cable. Why is there justification for permitting? I'm not sure who can answer that.
Okay, actually, we were going to have the other gentleman, but Luke, if you want to just jump in. Okay, so why don't we have the second question?
All right, thank you very much, sir. Lassi Salami Lawal is my name, Associate Professor of Space Systems, also in the industry. Mine is just more of contribution. I want to thank you for the deliberations and insights so far. But what we're discussing here is not rocket science. I'm a rocket scientist. Beyond the fact that I understand we have, legislatures and jurisdictions around, the point here is all government of nations understand the criticality and importance of what submarine cable stands, particularly after COVID-19 learning curve. So it's government of nations, particularly global south countries, understand that it is as critical as the food we eat, is as basic as the shelter we seek, and is as important as the clothing that we. I remember last year, my Honorable Minister, Dynamic Honorable Minister, presented a position paper before the President of Federal Republic of Nigeria that all telecoms and associated equipment to telecommunication should be declared critical national infrastructure. And that came to be last year, August precisely. So at ITU level, that regulates issue on telecommunications with almost over 200 member nations. I want to also proceed that ITU also declares submarine cable around international waters as critical international infrastructure that enables digital transformation and development around the continent. That's one. On the other side, I also want to say, particularly on the side of manufacturers, manufacturers also have a big role to play, particularly when it comes to actually building resilient submarine cable around trawlers, providing job. And when you do CNI, when you declare that it is now critical international infrastructure, what that means is paramilitary and military of all nations, including Coastal Guard, will also provide additional protection over this, particularly when the patrol a continental shelf and coastal area of the waters, including also providing geospatial information where these are laid, where these submarine keep, so that trawlers, fishermen, miners, undersea miners, avoid those areas. And the other word I have for manufacturer is the fact that if there has to be additional layer of protection on this infrastructure, particularly when we carry out feasibility studies and we know where you have high probability of seismic activity, particularly around the ring of fire of the planet Earth, then there should be extra protection, just the same way we have extra protection against shark. We should be able to have slags, ring of slags, strengthened by steel, such that when you have tectonic plate movement, then obviously it offers some level of protection to this, critical infrastructure. I have more. Just this year, I published a paper on the need for telecommunication corridor. And part of my paper also include the fact that we have an issue worrying us in West African sub-region. Rats. You have rats with canine teeth, that they have this kind of what I may call anatomy with ligament and tendons around their jaw that tear off your hip. I've experienced downtime several times because of rats. So what that means is manufacturers should come in to fortify against even cables we lay within metropolitan cities against such kind of incidents and all of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll come back to the notion of critical infrastructure and protection zones, but that's a lot of the work that ICPC has been doing. And, Andy Palmer-Felgate was presenting some at the very beginning, some basic, there was some you did in Kent, Bracy, using Andy's data, talked about these things. And we do have to have both physical as well as logical protections of the cables. But in responding to Nemsa's question, Luke?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. It's obviously, permitting is obviously a matter of particular interest to a lot of people, and I can't speak for all systems, but within our system, one of the key reasons for different types of permits are the number of agency interests that are interested when a cable is being repaired versus when one's being installed in the first place. I also mentioned within our system the obligation to protect your network, and so part of that includes an ability for the government to have some oversight over how a cable's being repaired and when and whether that has implications for our broader communications in the country. And it's also because we have the cable corridors and protection zone framework, it's necessary for others within the system to be aware that repairs are occurring, and the permitting process allows for us to have some ability to oversee that. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Anybody else want to respond to that? Please.
I think for me, it's just really highlight to what the last gentleman spoke about. I think there's definitely a need of approach. And that approach is, I think we cannot overemphasize it. It's been said in this panelist, Douglas mentioned about it, that as stakeholders in this industry, we really have to change how we perceive the critical infrastructure. So we need to bring the right people on the table. I just want to emphasize that as even our closing remarks, bringing the right people on the table to change how we frame this and the kind of then the permitting regime and the regulatory regimes that come out of it. But it will take concerted effort by all the stakeholders and policymakers, especially to bring that, because they're the ones who bring the shared interests together. So thank you.
So just picking up on that for a moment, what Jane, what you were saying, is that it's not just the minister, the vice minister, the head of the regulatory agencies, but in many ways, it's the staff within the agencies and the departments. And one of the things, and staff move. And so one of the things that I think that we can do as industry working collaboratively with government is helping the staff understand the technology, its evolution, the trends, what it takes to build these systems, and to the intervention, right? The importance of the cables and what it means. Why does it take 3 to 4 years, right? You know, what happens when you have to book a ship, a vessel, 2 to 3 years in advance, and if local permitting means you miss that window, right? What happens? What are the costs? What are the implications? And some of the work that we've done in terms of working with staff level people at governments, helping them understand, right, has been an eye-opener. And it actually has changed the way people work and understand and process applications, for example, understanding the urgency, the time sensitivity. So I think that there's things that we can do working together, right? And that's part of the terms of what, again, going back to the advisory bodies, some of the things that we can do there to facilitate the investment while at the same time addressing the real and important policy concerns by government. It's not either or, it's and, it's both together, working together. So I think we have time for another question if there is one. Back over here, I'm seeing somebody point. Right over here. And yeah, you can just push the button, please.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, I'm Isaac Aiku from Ghana. I wanted to ask this question. Yeah, we all acknowledge that, I think from yesterday, we got the confirmation that about 70% of our incidents are being caused by other marine users like the fisher folks and those out there. So my question then is, what can government do to enact maybe laws, that will serve as deterrent to those users that impact on the cables? What can government do? Because if we are acknowledging that we have 70% of the incidents or cable cuts, be it cable cut or transport, being caused by other marine users, what can government do or regulatory bodies do to enact the laws that will serve as deterrent to these users? That's my question.
Thank you. Anna.
Thank you for your question. It's a really important one, and it's ones that governments are grappling with all the time. I think industry have taken on a huge amount of responsibility in the way that they design cables, the way they lay cables, working with the fishing industry. A lot of companies will also have fisheries liaison officers and spend a lot of time working with the fishing industry to try and raise that. And that includes producing some charting software that the ICPC and NASCA have been part of, to show those locations of the cables to make it easier for the fishermen to avoid them. From a government perspective, we need to work with industry to support that work. But I think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of raising awareness with the fishing industry and kind of policy approaches, as well as looking at legal frameworks. So UNCLOS requires us to have in place domestic legislations to protect cables. We don't all have those. Part of that legislation should be about trying to deter the kind of activities that are leading to these cable breaks. So advising fishermen to avoid fishing over cables. But it's quite a difficult one to get the balance right with. And I think this is something that every country is really grappling with, because by putting in place tough legislations and rules to try and stop cable damage, you don't want to have the kind of unintended consequence knock-on effect of actually encouraging bad behavior. So for example, it's advisable for a fisherman not to fish over a cable, because if they snag their nets, it's dangerous, the ship can sink, people have died, as well as damaging the cable. But if you make it illegal to fish over a cable, and then a fisherman does, and snags their net, what happens then? And if the legislation is just literally going to, send them to prison, put a big fine on them, do that, then they're probably not going to cut their nets and call the cable company and do the appropriate, sensible thing. They're probably going to wait for the tide to turn and hope that they get unsnagged and they can head on their way, which makes it more dangerous and causes more damage. So that's one thing. It's about these unintended consequences. And I think it's the same when we think about protections. So protection corridors, cable corridors, they work in some places. They don't work in other places. There are geographic constraints, there are environmental constraints. And various different countries, again, are looking at, are there legislations that we can put in place? Do we require our cables to be buried to 3 meters? Do we need to have better protection of them? What are the legal frameworks that we can use to better protect those cables? And I think in doing that, we have to be really careful as governments to get the balance and not let the laws that we put in place allow that kind of securitization to become the enemy of resilience. Because ultimately, in order to have a resilient system, in order to prevent this damage, we need to create the legislatory environment to encourage good behaviors, to support the industry and the work that they do to protect their cables and stop those cables being damaged. And where appropriate, hold them to account. So if there's a, if there's a ship that accidentally drops its anchor and drags it across a few cables, are we able to board that ship? Are we able to arrest it? Do we hold them to account? Do we have those legal powers? And what are we doing in advance of that? So there are international standards, there are international requirements, there are things, there are mechanisms on ships for holding cables, holding anchors up, for example. And there are requirements about those being maintained and those being put in place under tow. And we know that quite regularly they're not put in place, they're not maintained, they're not there. So what are we doing using the legal frameworks around safety to stop those accidents from happening? So I think it's a good question and it's quite broad, but it's one that we all need to think about.
Thank you. Douglas.
Hello. Yeah, so I think it's simple. Prevention, accountability, and collaboration. It's very expensive to repair a cable. And it's actually unfortunate that based on the numbers that we are talking about in terms of where they occur, are things that can be prevented. And there should be a lot more accountability when it comes to the actors of these cable cuts. There are countries actually that have made it a criminal offense to damage submarine cables. That's something that governments should explore in ensuring there's accountability. And then more importantly, collaboration. The only way we can prevent these incidents from happening is ensuring that our collaboration mechanisms at the government level, and I'm glad Luke has talked about the resilience department. It preempts some of the actions that all industry players need to plug into that ensure that we avoid, or at least can prevent, the avoidable ones.
Thank you. I'm getting the signal that our time actually has expired. But thank you again, and if we could thank them again, a great panel. Thank you.
We'll take a group picture now. Thank you, Dr. Pepper, for moderating and bringing your wealth of experience on the issue of legal and regulatory frameworks. Thanks to His Excellency Ambassador Ernest Noon, Mr. Luke Slattery, Dr. Jane Munga, Mr. Douglas Njenga, and Dr. Anna Buchas. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, we'll be taking a lunch break now for just 1 hour. Today's lunch is courtesy of Huawei. Thank you, Huawei, for supporting the summit. My colleague Amira will be leading the advisory body to the Zuma Lounge. The advisory body, please, will be led by Amira to the Zuma Lounge, while the rest of us will convene upstairs for lunch. So see you in an hour. Thank you so much.